Okay, so today we're looking at how to craft like the perfect invitation.
Yeah.
An invitation that someone's going to have a really hard time saying no to.
Right.
And specifically, you found this advice that's geared towards men on how to invite women to do things in a way that will like make them sweat nervously and say yes.
Yeah, apparently a guaranteed recipe for attraction.
Yeah, so we're going to unpack that a little bit today, see if there's anything to it.
Yeah, I'm curious too, because on the one hand,
Yeah.
I think when we look at like dating advice and stuff like that, there's a lot of like kind of gimmicky stuff out there.
Right.
But, there's also something to be said for like, paying attention to psychology and like, social dynamics.
Absolutely.
So I'm curious to kind of see what this source has to say.
Yeah, me too. And the first one here is interesting. It's called the Conditional Invitation.
Okay.
And the example they give is, I'll walk you home, but only if you join me for a smoothie afterwards. So what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, right off the bat, I see what they're going for there.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of like a playful, like, I'm not just offering you something, I'm making you work for it a little bit.
Right. It's not a freebie.
Exactly. And I think that can be kind of intriguing. It's like, oh, this person's not just like, gonna throw themselves at me.
Yeah.
They're playing it a little bit cool.
Right. It's like that push and pull thing that people talk about.
Exactly. And it also suggests a certain level of confidence, right? Like it's like, I'm not afraid to set the terms of this interaction. Like I'm comfortable enough with myself to do that.
Right. It's like, I'm not just gonna let you walk all over me.
Yeah. So there's definitely an element of that, and I think that can be attractive. Like people are drawn to confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also kind of flips the script a little bit, because so often it's like, especially for guys, I think there's this pressure to be like, the one who's always pursuing and always like, trying to win someone over.
Right.
And this is kind of like, I'm not chasing you. I'm offering you something, but you gotta meet me halfway.
Right.
It's
like a two-way street kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that can be really refreshing for people to hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially if they're used to like the same old, pickup lines or whatever.
Right.
So I kind of like that one.
Yeah, and from a psychological perspective, I think it tapped into this idea of like reward systems in the brain.
Yeah.
Like when something is a little bit unexpected,
Okay.
a little bit challenging,
Yeah.
it actually makes it more rewarding when we do get it.
Interesting.
Right, so it's
Yeah.
like by adding that little conditional element,
Yeah.
it's like you're actually making the prospect of spending time with you even more appealing.
Yeah. So it's like that anticipation builds up a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah. And then when you finally do say yes to that smoothie, it's like, oh, this is even better than I thought it was going to be.
Interesting.
Because I had to work for it a little bit.
I like it. Okay. So the next one, let's see, is about novel experiences.
Okay.
So their example here is, I'm going paddleboarding this weekend. Come with me.
I like that one.
Yeah.
It's very adventurous.
Yeah. And it's just like, it sounds more interesting than like, let's go to a bar or something.
Right, exactly. And I think, again, there's a psychological principle at play here, which is that our brains are wired to crave novelty.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like we get a dopamine hit when we experience something new.
It's like that feeling of like excitement and anticipation when you're trying something for the first time.
Exactly. And so when you invite someone to do something novel with you, you're essentially inviting them to share in that dopamine hit.
I like it.
Right? It's like you're creating a shared experience that's going to be exciting and memorable for both of you.
It's like when you travel to a new place and everything just seems so much more vibrant and interesting.
Exactly.
Because it's new and different.
Exactly. And so it's the same thing with like dating or just like social interactions in general. Like you can inject a little bit of novelty into the mix. It's just going to be more engaging and more memorable for everyone involved.
Right. And I think it also kind of shows that you're the kind of person who seeks out new experiences.
Right.
Which I think is attractive. It shows that you're not bored.
Exactly. Yeah. Like you're not just going to sit at home and watch TV all day.
Right. Exactly. You're out there, you're living life.
And I think that's a very attractive quality to have, because it suggests that you're curious, you're adventurous, you're open to new things.
Right. You're not afraid to step outside your comfort zone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those are all qualities that are going to make you more interesting and more appealing to be around.
Right. It's like you're more likely to be the life of the party.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And who doesn't want to be around the life of the party?
That's a good point. Okay, so we've got these like playful challenges. We've got this sense of adventure. What is this last one here?
Let's see.
Okay, so this one is called the value play.
Okay.
And the example they give is this: I've always been terrified of swimming. Would you come to the pool with me and help me get comfortable in the water?
Interesting.
So what do you think about that one?
Well, it's definitely a different approach.
Right.
It's a lot more vulnerable, I think, than the other two.
Yeah.
Like you're really putting yourself out there. You're admitting to a fear or weakness.
Right.
And you're asking for help.
It's kind of endearing in a way.
Right, and I think that could be very effective because it creates this instant sense of intimacy.
Right, because you're sharing something personal.
Exactly, and it also taps into this very human need to feel needed.
Okay.
Like when someone asks us for help, it makes us feel competent, it makes us feel important.
Right, like we have something to offer.
Exactly, and so by asking for help in this way, you're actually subtly complimenting the other person. You're saying like, I value your opinion, I value your skill.
Right, I trust you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that can be very flattering.
Yeah, and I think it also kind of like subverts that traditional gender dynamic a little bit too, because I think so often it's like the guy is supposed to be the strong one, the one who's got it all together.
Right.
And this is like, I'm man enough to admit that I need help sometimes.
Exactly.
And I'm not afraid to ask for it.
Right, and I think that vulnerability can be very attractive, especially to women who are maybe tired of that like hyper-masculine stereotype.
Right, they want someone who's a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more in touch with their emotions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's definitely something to be said for that.
Okay, but I can also see how this one could backfire.
Oh, absolutely.
If it's not done genuinely.
Right.
Like if you're just using it as a manipulation tactic.
Yeah, if it's not authentic,
Yeah.
it's going to come across as really insincere and kind of slimy.
Right.
Like you're just trying to get something from someone.
Then it's just going to ruin it.
Exactly. So I think the key with this one is to make sure that you're being genuine.
Yeah.
Like you're actually asking for help.
Yeah.
Because you need it, not because you think it's going to make you seem more attractive.
Right. It has to come from a place of authenticity.
Exactly.
Otherwise, it's just going to backfire.
Right.
So I think that's an important caveat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like with all of these things, it's all about the intention behind it.
Right.
Like if you're coming from a place of genuine connection and you're not trying to manipulate anyone, then I think these could actually be really effective.
Right. I agree. And even beyond just like the romantic context, I think these principles can apply to like any kind of social interaction.
Right.
Like if you're trying to make friends, if you're trying to network professionally,
Yeah.
like these ideas of playfulness and novelty and vulnerability,
Right.
they can be really powerful.
They're universally appealing in a way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's really valuable to be aware of these things.
Okay, so we've unpacked these 3 tips from this article. And I'm already kind of like, my mind is blown a little bit because I'm thinking about like past interactions I've had. I'm like, oh yeah,
Right.
I can see how those dynamics were at play.
Right.
But I'm curious, like, is there anything else? Is there like a bigger picture here that we're missing?
Yeah, I think there is.
Like, why do these things work?
Right. Why do these tactics or strategies or whatever you want to call them, why they resonate with people?
Yeah.
I think it goes back to like basic human needs.
Okay.
Like we all crave connection.
Right.
We crave novelty. We crave a sense of significance.
Right.
And I think these invitations, when they're done well, they address those needs in a very subtle but effective way.
So it's not about manipulation. It's about like tapping into those core desires
Exactly.
that we all have.
Yeah, and if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective,
Okay.
like humans are social creatures.
Yeah.
We've survived and thrived because of our ability to cooperate and form bonds.
Right.
And so these invitations, in a way, they're just like modern expressions of those deeply ingrained social instincts.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So it's like we're hardwired to respond to these things
To a certain extent, yes.
on a subconscious level.
Right? Because they're tapping into those very primal needs.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and so I think by understanding the why behind these tactics,
Right?
we can actually become more effective communicators.
Right.
And ultimately lead to richer, more fulfilling interactions.
So it's not just about like getting a date or getting someone to say yes to something.
Right.
It's about like actually building deeper connections.
Exactly. And I think
Yeah.
that's a really important distinction to make.
Yeah, I agree.
Because if you're just focused on like the outcome,
Right.
then you're missing the whole point.
Right. You're missing the journey.
Exactly. And the journey's where the real magic happens.
I like that.
Okay.
Okay, so let's say our listeners out there and they're like, okay, this is all very interesting, but like, what's the one thing I should take away from this?
Yeah.
What's the most important thing to keep in mind?
I would say focus on authenticity.
Okay.
Like all of these tactics and strategies and principles, they can be helpful, but they should never feel forced or manipulative.
Right.
The most important thing is to be genuine in your interactions.
Right.
And let your true self shine through.
Because at the end of the day, people can spot a fake
They
a
like-
mile away.
Yeah. Like we're pretty good at detecting insincerity.
Right. So it's not worth it
No.
to try to be someone you're not.
Right. Just be yourself.
Exactly.
And if someone doesn't like that, then they're not the right person for you anyway.
I love that advice.
Yeah.
Okay, so there you have it, folks.
Right.
the secret to crafting irresistible invitations.
Or at least a few tips and tricks
Exactly.
to get you started.
Remember, be playful, be adventurous.
Don't be afraid to be a little vulnerable.
Nextly.
And most importantly, be yourself.
And with that in mind, I think we are ready to take a quick break. Sounds good.
We'll be right back after this.
So it's like we're building a connection through vulnerability and through like shared experiences. And that's something that's like takes time to develop organically, but like a well-crafted invitation can be that like catalyst.
Exactly. And you know, while these tips are geared towards like romantic attraction, I think the underlying principles apply to all kinds of relationships.
Right.
Like whether it's building rapport with a colleague or deepening a friendship, like these ideas of like, you know, creating a sense of shared experience or tapping into that desire for novelty can be incredibly valuable.
Yeah, like we're all social creatures at the end of the day, and we crave those connections.
Sure.
So it's like, even if it's not a romantic thing, it's still like you're speaking to that part of someone.
Absolutely.
Where they're like, oh, this is something that I want to be a part of.
Right. And you know, even just like the act of inviting someone to do something.
Yeah.
Like it shows that you're thinking of them. You're putting in the effort.
It's not just like an afterthought.
Exactly. It's like you're making an effort to include them in your life.
Right.
And that in and of itself can be very meaningful.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about how these invitations work, but I'm curious about the why.
Okay.
Like, is there an overarching explanation for why these tactics, I mean, for lack of a better word, seem to resonate with people?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we were just talking about.
Okay.
Like those basic human needs.
Yeah.
Like we crave connection, we crave novelty, we crave a sense of significance.
Right.
And these invitations, when they're done authentically, they address those needs in subtle but effective ways.
Right. So it's not about manipulation. It's about like tapping into those core desires.
Exactly.
That we all have.
Yeah. And you know, if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, like humans are social creatures.
Right.
We've survived and thrived because of our ability to cooperate and form bonds.
Right. Like we're pack animals at the end of the day.
Exactly. And so these invitations, in a way, they're just like modern expressions of those deeply ingrained social instincts.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's like we're hardwired to respond to these things on a subconscious level.
Right, because they're tapping into those very primal needs.
That's fascinating. Okay, so I'm starting to feel like I'm understanding this like on a deeper level.
Good.
Like it's not just about the words, it's about the intention behind them.
Right.
And it's about like understanding those like deeper psychological principles.
Exactly. And I think that understanding can make us more effective communicators.
Right.
And ultimately lead to richer, more fulfilling interactions.
It's like you're speaking the language of the subconscious.
In a way, yes.
I like it. Okay, so, but obviously, like, we have to acknowledge that there are no guarantees here.
Of course not.
Like, people are complex.
Right.
Attraction is a mysterious thing.
Absolutely.
So we can't, like, bottle this up and sell it as, like, a surefire method.
Right, there's no magic formula.
Right.
But I do think that these principles can increase the odds of a positive response.
Right, it's like you're stacking the deck in your favor a little bit.
Exactly.
By being more intentional with your approach.
And I think that's really what it comes down to, is like being mindful of the psychology behind human interaction.
Right.
And using that knowledge to create more meaningful connections.
It's like you're a social engineer.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but I think there's something to be said for, like, you know, being strategic about these things.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, we all want to connect with people.
Right.
We all want to have those fulfilling relationships.
Absolutely.
And if we can use a little bit of psychology to help us do that, then why not?
I'm all for it. It's like you're providing like a framework for understanding not just what works, but like why it works.
Exactly. And that understanding can make us more effective communicators.
Right.
And ultimately, you know, lead to richer, more fulfilling interactions.
It's like we're always saying on the show, knowledge is power.
Exactly.
So for our listener out there who's maybe feeling a little overwhelmed with all this like psychology talk, what would be your biggest takeaway? Like, what's the one thing they should focus on when they're like, okay, I'm gonna go out there and craft my next like amazing invitation?
I'd say focus on authenticity.
Okay.
Like, all of these tactics can be helpful, but they should never feel forced or manipulative.
Right.
The most important thing is to be genuine in your interactions and let your true self shine through.
I love that, because
Okay.
at the end of the day, it's not really about the smoothie or the paddleboarding.
Right.
It's about connecting with another human being on a meaningful level.
Exactly. It's about creating those moments of shared experience and vulnerability
Oh, yeah.
that form the foundation of any strong relationship.
And that's something that you can't fake.
You can't fake it.
Yeah, it's got to be
Yeah.
real.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a really fascinating deep dive, I feel like. We've uncovered some really valuable insights today
Absolutely.
about the art of crafting irresistible invitations, and maybe even learned a thing or two about human psychology along the way.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
For our listener out there, I hope this inspires you to be a little more creative,
Yeah,
a little more intentional with your next invitation.
absolutely.
You never know what kind of amazing connections you might forge.
That's right.
Until next time, happy connecting.